Another confirmation comes from undesigned coincidences, which is where some question or missing information in one record is answered incidentally, casually, in passing by another account. This actually happens quite frequently between the different books in the New Testament, and this book, Hidden in Plain View, by Lydia McGrew, has a great list and explanation of many of these places. I'll just mention a few. Jesus' miracle of the feeding of 5,000 men is mentioned in several Gospels. In Mark 6:39, it says, "Then he commanded everyone to sit down in groups on the green grass." Why does Mark specifically mention that the grass was green? Well, in John 6, verse 4, right before discussing the same event, John mentions that the Passover was at hand. We know that Passover happens in the spring, and for most of the year the grass is not green in that part of the world. It's quite dry. But it is green in the spring after the winter rains, around at the time of Passover. So it's a tiny little casual corroboration from one historical account to the other, confirming each other accidentally, as eyewitness accounts tend to do. Another undesigned coincidence in the same miracle story is when Jesus asks Philip in John 6, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" We might wonder a little bit, why Philip? He's one of the less known apostles, not like Peter or James or Andrew or John, who are much more frequently mentioned. Well, if we look at Luke's Gospel, chapter 9, verse 10, we learn that the feeding of the 5,000 took place near Bethsaida. And back in John chapter 1, verse 44, we learn that Philip was from the city of Bethsaida. None of these Gospels give the whole story, but when we put them together, it makes more sense why Jesus would single out Philip to ask him this question, since he was the local guy and he would know more about the local merchants. And again, it's kind of a incidental. They're not deliberately putting in these clues in a very obvious way. They're just sort of accidentally happening to confirm each other. Another undesigned coincidence is when some men are recorded as giving false testimony against Jesus, saying that he was going to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days, recorded in Mark chapter 14, Matthew chapter 26. This is interesting, but if that was all we had, it would be mysterious. Why did they accuse him of this? Why the detail about rebuilding it in 3 days? If they were just making up a false accusation against him, they could have made much harsher accusations, like saying he was just going to destroy the temple and nothing about rebuilding it, unless there was based on some sort of actual saying that Jesus said. When we come over to the Gospel of John, chapter 2, in a different context, John records that Jesus had answered the Jewish leaders when they asked him specifically for a sign as to why he was cleansing the temple. Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And that explains where the accusation comes from later, as recorded in the other Gospels, Mark and Matthew. John doesn't mention anything about the accusation at Jesus' trial. Mark and Matthew don't mention Jesus' statement earlier, but together they accidentally corroborate each other. Moving to the other parts of the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians 16:19, Paul sends greetings from his friends Priscilla and Aquila to the church at Corinth. He had first met them during his visit to Corinth, as described in Acts chapter 18, and at this later time when Paul is writing the letter of 1 Corinthians, apparently all three of them were in Ephesus at that time. But in the book of Romans chapter 16, verses 3-5, he sends greetings to Priscilla and Aquila in Rome. From other parts of Acts, we can infer that the book of Romans was written about 11 months after 1 Corinthians was written. So that's plenty of time for Priscilla and Aquila to have moved back to Rome after the Jews were allowed to return to Rome. But if someone had been trying to make up this story decades later, such as writing a fictional version of Acts, it would have been easy to have accidentally mixed up the dates so it would not have fit in with the epistles of 1 Corinthians and Romans that he wrote from Priscilla and Aquila in the Corinthians and to Priscilla and Aquila in Romans. Likewise, in 1 Corinthians 4:17, Paul mentions to the Corinthians that he has already sent Timothy to them. But later in the same letter, in chapter 16, verse 10, Paul says, "Now if Timothy comes, see that he is with you without cause to be afraid." The implication is that Timothy is already on his way from Ephesus to Corinth, but Paul somehow expects the letter to arrive in Corinth before Timothy arrives. Think about why that would be. If we go over to the book of Acts, chapter 19, verse 22, it mentions that Paul had sent Timothy and Erastus into Macedonia while he himself stayed back in Asia Minor for a while. It seems that this is the moment when Paul wrote the letter to Corinth, and you can see in this map that he likely sent the letter by the straight sea route to Corinth, while Timothy was slowly traveling over land through Macedonia, walking basically. So the timing fits perfectly, and it's an incidental or casual confirmation because neither book fully specifies all the details. You can read more about this incidental undesigned coincidences in the supplemental material, and the book's about many dozens more of these, showing that they're recording accurate history in the New Testament. In conclusion of these videos, let's summarize. We talked about how we have a lot of relatively early manuscripts, which allow us to know the original text quite closely. We have good evidence for the authorship of the Gospels and good reason to see how they could have remembered Jesus' teachings for the years after he died until they were written down. We've talked about some reasons to see the New Testament as historical, not as hopelessly biased legends. And now, if we do have accurate copies of the New Testament and the authors were accurately reporting history rather than myths or legends, that means Jesus actually taught those things, actually rose from the dead. And think about the implications of that. He is who he claimed to be, the divine Son of God, the creator of the world, who came down to earth to rescue everyone who believes in him by dying for our sins. This has huge implications for your life and my life. I hope that you read the New Testament and continue to dig into the evidence for yourself to see how reliable it is and think how you can apply it to your life. If you're thinking about how to use this evidence to help your friends believe, actually no evidence will ever be able to convince someone who's not open to the evidence. As David Wood says, we all have a skeptometer inside our minds. That is, we're all prone to adjusting the level of evidence we consider sufficient to prove something we don't want to believe. We should start by praying for our friends and then gently ask them questions, as exemplified well by Greg Koukl's book called Tactics. And then only share the evidence gently with people if they seem ready or interested, and be ready to listen to their responses or pushbacks and do further research ourselves. This is my first draft of this video, and I'm not a professional historian, so there might be some errors. I'll be glad to correct those in my next version of this. I'm only reading the work of others and trying to consider arguments both for and against the reliability of the New Testament. My motivation in putting this video together was to collect in one place a set of resources and condensed answers to common questions and resources where people can learn more and go deeper. So I'll put some recommended links and books into the supplement document linked below, and feel free to contact me if you have any more questions or suggestions. And God bless you.